Welcome to our second episode
Thank
with
you very
my
much,
comrade
Omar.
brother.
How are you today?
I'm okay. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm awesome. I'm very well. Thank you.
I understand we just landed in the US
Oh yeah, a week ago, like
a week
Sunday,
ago.
Monday, somewhere there. We
Oh,
started a
that's
little venture
good.
there, so we had to be there to handle some bank accounts or something like that. So yeah, it was not
Great.
planned, but then we just all of a sudden just yeah.
That's very important to know, and that's great news to all of us. And we wish you success in all your endeavors.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, today we are going to be with our comrade brother, author Takudizwa, who is going to be taking through his book, Vehicle for Progress. And this is our second episode. Hopefully, we shall have a third episode next week as we conclude this book. As we said, we are going to be posting the link for the Amazon link for the book so that you can be able to go and get copies and support a brother who is an author and writing beautifully about Africa. My name is Kato Mukasa, and tonight we are having Taku Duza. Taku, please do greet our viewers.
Thank you very much. How are you today, everyone? I hope everyone is having a very pleasant Saturday. My name is Takuzo Mazwenduna. I'm a Zimbabwean humanist author, um, and I love writing. My passion is writing about humanist issues or objective morality and ideas that I think are very progressive and can take the world forward. I'm very happy to be here. We're talking about my first book, A Vehicle for Progress. It's a book about African cultural dynamics and how they affect progress. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's a very good introduction to the book. Viewers, those who are joining us today, this is our second episode. We are looking at a book called Vehicle for Progress. You can always get a copy from Amazon. We shall be sharing a link, but still, you can always put in the author's name, Takuduzwa Muzwenduna, and then the title of the book, Vehicle for Progress, and you'll get a book and then be able to read. It's a very captivating book, 12 chapters, very rich, over 325 pages. I've been reading through the book chapter by chapter and appreciating what the author is putting forward for the readers, rich for all of us who would like to know more about Africa, but also looking for solutions on how to take Africa forward. Today we shall not have Linda. She's having some challenges with network and with work in South Africa. So I'll be your host tonight. And of course, we shall continue having this conversation with Takubiza and then be able to learn more from his writing. Now, in the first episode, we looked at the first 4 chapters of the book, the first 5 chapters of the book. We looked at manners, we looked at the timekeeper, the dead Jew, and I'd like us to look more at religion from the angle of the dead Jew so that we can get the gist out very well. We looked at the new African citizen and the new king of the African king. Now, we looked briefly at these chapters to give you an idea of what the book is all about. And we did say that the book is about Africa, about African, but also exposing what we go through in Africa, what makes us us, and gives you a background from which we'll be able to appreciate our challenges, but also our strength, and then our weaknesses, and then we map a way forward as progress for Africa. Now, today I'd like the author to take us through religion, giving the background of the dead Jew, but also these foreign religions vis-a-vis the homegrown. I normally call them the homegrown religions, and how they affect us as people, especially people living in Africa. I would say this: when I was reading one of the chapters in your book, there is a story we talk about your mother being Catholic. My mother was Catholic, very strange Catholic. Basically, my mother is still a Catholic because she lives up to date. Very
Oh, I
strange
see. So
Catholic.
we have
My
a similar
father.
experience going to catechism and all of that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, my father was secular, but my mother was a very strong Catholic. Now, when I look at your
Yeah.
mother, you gave an example of when you went to church, you changed to a Pentecostal church, and then your mother summoned you and told you, never do it again. Let it be the last time to go and be
Yes.
with such filthy, disorganized, bad people. And you must not leave the Catholic Church. I was
Exactly.
reading that and it touched me, and it reminded me how much our parents had influence on us, pushing us into religions they never knew a thing about. Religions
Exactly.
that were taught to them by their parents, whose
Exactly.
parents also taught them the same religions they never understood. So that kind of indoctrination, the example you give there, and how your mother threatens you and tells you, let this be the last time I see you in this Pentecostal church. And the way you explained the Pentecostal church, you went there, you were greeted, everyone is clapping hands and everyone is happy. Then you get bored with the long sermons and men in suits speaking too much endlessly. And the experience to go there was rich enough for you to say, this is not where I belong. So
Yeah.
I'd like us to go through religion, the aspects of religion you talk about in the book. We can touch here and there, but the gist of the matter should come out. How does religion influence us? And how do we become religious? How do our parents shape us into becoming what they want us to be, not what you want us to be? Let us go through religion using your book as a yardstick. Welcome on that.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kato. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, like so I grew up in a Catholic household, that's very true. The rest of my family, both my mother's and my father's side, were all Catholic, all of them.
Mm,
So my father died when I was 3 years old, but he was a science teacher. So
mm,
and he didn't go to church. No one said explicitly that he was secular or he was an atheist or anything like that, but people kind of gave me that hint because I remember the first time I told everyone like, hey, I don't believe in any of this, and then they're like, ah, it's taking after the father.
mm,
So yeah, I suspect being a science teacher because I saw a lot of books like that he left behind, like Bernard Shaw, um, or a lot of science books like Stephen Hawking, like that he left behind
mm,
him. So, like, I suspect he would have been an atheist, but like the greater part of my family, they were all Catholic. My maternal grandmother, my paternal grandmother, everyone, my
mm,
grandfather, and it's just my maternal grandmother who had a bit of mixed. She was mixed religion. Of course, she went to the Catholic Church just to be in good books with her children, I suspect, because she has
mm.
more African traditional religious beliefs than she has the Catholic ones. So, and I spent most of my childhood with her. And so, when I would see her way of thinking and the way of the general family's thinking, I was always see like a different in attitudes because being
Mm,
from the African traditional side of things, she's more tolerant of new ideas because they are not
mm,
monotheistic like that. They
yeah.
they are animists. They believe in ancestors.
Mm,
It's all about ancestors.
mm,
They didn't even
mm,
have a god. She was indifferent when she talked to me about
mm,
Catholicism or all those Bible stories. But when she talked about the ancestors and everything, yeah, she was very enthusiastic. And she wouldn't look at anyone from a different religion or a different point of view with with disapproval, because as an animist, just like polytheists, they believe there are a lot of deities and there are a lot of so wherever you're coming from, like, and whatever you're believing, it's legitimate. It's unlike monotheism, the Christian side of the family, where like everyone is always saying like there's only one God and we don't accept any other reality that is other than that. So there was that difference I noticed from an early age between my mixed religion maternal grandmother and the rest of everyone I was related to. And then like I was always a curious person. So as a child, I was always asking questions about religion, and they always cut like those questions should never be asked. You want to burn in hell? So like you're scared into not like being curious or being about certain things or asking difficult questions. Even when I went to catechism, like it was more of intimidation, and I'm sure you also have a catechist experience.
I will share that.
Yeah, being told about unforgivable sins. Like I remember the first time I heard about the unforgivable sin, never insult the Holy Spirit, and I was like, what? Okay, so I should never think this. Never. Yeah, I think that's where some of the trauma comes from. And then, yeah, I also did all of that, like going for confession, in the confession box with the priest, doing all those sacraments. I grew up like a very devout Catholic. And I think even in my early years of high school, I was very devout because all I knew was how I've been raised. But then it also happened that I was a history nerd. I'm still a history nerd. Like I read a lot of history. If I was in the library, I probably have a history book. And history was my way of answering a lot of questions about how did things come to be this way? Where do these people come from? Or how did it come to be Zimbabwe? How did it come to be Africa? Stuff like that. I was always like looking through those Encyclopedia Britannicas and everything. And then the encyclopedias weren't very explicit on those issues. They would, of course, give you a history, but then they wouldn't give you like the bigger story of it all. Like they would give you a hint of say, okay, there was canonization of scriptures. This pope or this emperor legalized Christianity in the Roman Empire, or the imperial cult, this and that. So they were just like not definitive stories about religion. I think they shied around through the particulars, but I was starting to see a trend. It was enough for me to see a trend that this was just another cultural construct. But again, because of the trauma from my Catholic childhood, I wasn't asking those questions as explicitly as well. I was shying around the question. And then I was also a hip hop music fan. And people at school used to nickname me Biggie because I was really big. I was a very big guy. I used to play basketball and rugby. So I was very big. Like even to the average sized teenager, I was always oversized, wearing size 11 UK size shoes when I was just 13, wearing size 15 UK shoes now. So it was, I was a giant. I'm a giant. I was always a giant. So people called me Big, and I think consequently I got to like the rapper Notorious Big, and his lyricism, I think, was what like like it wore down that trauma of fear I had with questioning my beliefs. I remember listening to one of his tracks called Suicidal Thoughts, and it criticizes religion a lot. Like he says stuff like when I die I want to go to hell because I've done like I wouldn't even like dream of ever going to heaven with all the goodies, and I'd like to be with my people in hell, like shooting dice and throwing dice, and it's the song has explicit lyrics, but basically it's one of the most blasphemous songs I've ever heard. So it was like a guilty pleasure of mine. Like I would listen to it, I'd be like, okay, this is new, this is shocking, but and then I remember like there was this rivalry between him and Tupac, and then Tupac had a song called Hail Mary, and then being a Catholic, Hail Mary meant a lot to me as well. But then the Notorious Big had a reply to that song that went something like he was actually dissing Mary, saying he never knew her, so why should he care, and all of that. And then so it was all like outrageous to me, like wow. So I think that type of music was what kind of desensitized me at first. And then there was also this another underground hip hop rapper called Mez. He actually has a song called The Gods Have Gone Crazy. And he questions everything about religion in this song. Like it's a rhyme poking holes in all the beliefs about Christianity. And that was the first song when I was like, wait a minute, he was actually rapping logic, like the logic of it all. And I was like, huh, like in a like a Socrates kind of way. So Socratic kind of method, and I was like, huh. So but then still I wasn't free enough to say. I was like I even said at that point I think I even started believing that like stories that were going around to say Christianity has to do with the Illuminati. Yeah, oh no, hip hop has to do with the Illuminati, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Because I was hearing all these blasphemous songs, but then they were also making sense. It wasn't until I was in my advanced levels that I did divinity and history and literature as my main subjects. And it was while doing these three subjects that I actually got access to literature that gave me a lot of the facts behind religion, and I got to understand it like, huh, okay. So I think I became an agnostic then. And then later on, like in my university years, is when I came across Arthur C. Clarke, and I learned about morality. And I remember also seeing like a Dan Baker video about morality. And it was that moral argument that made me lose religion completely. Like, because my whole idea of religion, of being a Christian in the first place, was that it was a moral framework, right? And then the moment I realized that morality had nothing to do with religion, it actually predates religion, and religion actually messes up people's idea of morality. I fell out of it, and religion is mostly about the idea of salvation. I remember last week I gave the example of those little Gideon books that have the verse John 3 verse 16, which is about salvation, written in all languages. And then the whole, because I know when I tell Christians that I don't believe, because your religion is not about morality, and I'm all about morality. Nothing else matters rather than the morality of it all.
Yeah.
So when I talk Christian, that I say, but then our Bible says love one another. Of course, every religion says that. There's a verse, I can quote a verse in every book, in every religious book I've written, that has those ethics of reciprocity. And in those little Gideon Bible books, it's not even the verse that was quoted. They didn't say love one another. It talked about, so whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life. That's what's important. They had to translate that verse in all languages, which means that is the priority verse, not the love one another. If it was that important, they should have made that verse in all the languages instead. And so that whole morality argument made me realize that, like, it's what gave me the courage to start questioning, to say, okay, even if God was real, right, I wouldn't want to worship a God that's this immoral, because I get familiar with the Bible, how it encourages slavery, how it encourages rape. I remember I had a time when I was just investigating the Bible, like reading it and seeing all the horrible verses, and I'm like, okay, why do we have a liturgical guide in Catholic Church where do they tell us which verses to read? And yeah, and once the morality side of it all was done, I started that's when I started like questioning everything else, like uh, to say science, the philosophical questions, where do we come from, and stuff. And my scientific literacy actually shot up. I wasn't a very much of a science guy. Of course, I took interest in it, and I did biology and some integrated science back when I was in high school. But then it wasn't like I had interest in it. I wasn't learning it because of my curiosity. I was learning it because I had to pass tests and stuff like that. So when I first studied it with the lens to say, I want some question answered, where do I come from? I read The Blind Watchmaker by Richard Dawkins, a, a brief history of the universe or something like that by Professor Stephen Hawking. Those books kind of like made me understand. I became scientifically literate, like in a way I hadn't been able to in our education system, where we've been taught evolution with a disclaimer, or where astrophysics was just something of a mystery that people just speculated about without ever having the will to learn about it, because there was Adam and Eve and a talking snake, and God created the universe in 7 days. So it really opened like it rehashed and it reopened like all that curiosity I had as a child, all those questions I was told you're not supposed to ask. I finally got the courage to ask them, and I say I've been in atheist for like since 2015. That makes it 8 years for now. And at this point, I can say I have learned more in those 8 years than I've ever learned in the 30 years of my life. It really opened my mind to not take things like on sentiment or without actually understanding. It gave me the drive to actually want to understand, and all those existential questions and all those practical questions about life. It just made me look at them in a realistic, rational way. And I'm not saying that atheism automatically makes people rational, or because I've met a lot of atheists who are quite the opposite. Maybe the only thing I have in common with them is that we don't believe in God. Otherwise, they are not curious. They still have their prejudices. They're not even like science literate. They would rather believe stories they hear on the Joe Rogan show than anything else they would ever hear. So it all got me thinking about religion's contribution in Africa. Of course, looking at history, you also learn that religion came to Africa through the Christian missionaries on a mission to civilize Africa. And it's a very interesting dynamic, because when the colonialists came to Africa, Europe had undergone a very important cultural reform process we now know as the Enlightenment. Ideals of Enlightenment had shaped the Napoleonic France that went on to invade a lot of African countries and Haiti. They had the ideas of Voltaire, even the Dutch that came to the Cape and all of that. They already had those David Hume philosophies and everything. The Enlightenment had shaped their government and their ideals of constitutionalism. But when they came to Africa or to the countries they were colonizing, they didn't come with those great ideas that they had just stumbled upon. They came with the ideas of the period before, the medieval age. That's the ideas that they came with. They came with it as a quote unquote civilizing tool, when in fact it was a acculturation tool. So in Zimbabwe, missionaries actually committed a mass genocide. They killed the people who refused to convert to Christianity, which is something else. Like because they knew that they wouldn't get to older people. They couldn't indoctrinate older people. They had to indoctrinate the younger ones. So they actually did a mass genocide to kill off the older ones who wouldn't leave their ancestral religions and indoctrinated the younger ones into Christianities in most of these missions. And they actually London Missionary Society documents that allude to this. And then yeah, so I can say one progressive attribute that the colonizers brought with them was reading and writing, because I know like most Bantu cultures didn't have reading and writing back then. But then still, the idea of reading and writing was brought in the context of the Bible. I mean, the Bible was the only book that was translated to African languages at first.
Up
like
today.
That's the only reason why they created a written version of Shona, of Ndebele, of any other, of Zulu, Xhosa, I'm sure Nyanja, Bemba, all of those languages. So you find that like they didn't translate Voltaire's ideas or Plato's ideas or any of the ideas that had led to the Enlightenment in their countries, that they had people to have civil liberties and civic awareness that they had today. So there's that, like instead of becoming or of having like those democratic mindset or like those Republican mindsets that they had, we have more of theocratic mindsets. That's why you have today like Zambians thinking they're a Christian nation. Whenever you bring about the issue of there's currently an issue of gay rights that is going on in Zambia. A few weeks ago, there was a few weeks ago there was a protest for gender-based violence, and then during this protest, some people came with the rainbow flag, also supporting this gender protest. And then this rainbow flag came with the whole notion of, these are agents of the West, which is ironic because homophobia was actually brought by Christian missionaries to Africa. And then they go on to say Zambia is a Christian nation. We will never accept this. And then I'm thinking like, okay, Christian nation because of the missionaries who came and made genocide and made sure that, so Christianity is a colonial religion in Africa. I mean, it's different when you talk about Christianity elsewhere in populations that maybe willingly accepted it.
Yeah.
And then I'm sure even for most of Europe, they had the Crusades. They became Christians because of the Crusades, which was also very violent. But yeah, eventually like they outgrew that, and they recognized it for what it was, like a system or a belief system that's very primitive. That's not, compatible with the ideals of liberty that people were warming up to today, or educated people.
Mm.
And that's why you find, like in Europe today, a lot of churches are becoming museums, and a lot of people are losing their religion. And then these religious organizations like the Catholic Church and the Anglican Church, they are also like undergoing through a process of religious relativism. It's
Yeah.
because to stay relevant, they have to update their values to match with that of the general population. Because most Europeans are becoming progressive, they have
Mm.
to um, like relate to, otherwise they're going to become irrelevant, which is why, like, I also gave the example of Pope John Paul acknowledging the theory of evolution, even though in Africa there's nothing like that, because they feel no need to. Africa didn't go through the same um, enlightenment yet. We're still in the medieval era, because that's what
We,
the colonial system brought us. We still have that medieval thinking. So churches here don't have churches in Africa, like, they do not have um, the they do not have any need to undergo any relativism, because Africa is still in the medieval times. We still have medieval values, so they can get away with enforcing those medieval values and
now,
denouncing stuff like human rights and yeah.
I think I should come in right there for our viewers and those reading the book and following us. Of course, I'm saying one thing for you to take note is the book is on our screen right now, Vehicle for Progress. The author is Takujuzwa Mazwenduna. You can support us by getting to Amazon and then look for the title, Vehicle for Progress, and the author's name, and then get yourself a copy. It is a 12 chapter book. Right now, what Chitaku is talking about is what he partly highlights in his book, which is very rich with a number of issues pertaining Africa. Today we are talking about religion, which he covers in several chapters across the book. He talks about his own background as a Catholic person growing up in a Catholic family, and how he's able to escape the yokes of Catholicism. There are things I share with you seriously, especially because I am raised from a Catholic family. My father was born in a Catholic family. My mother is born from a Catholic family. My father escaped Catholicism and chose to become a free thinker, to be a realist, to be a skeptical person who could ask questions. Yet my mother, up to now, remains a very staunch Catholic, very attached to her religion. But of course, with time, she's realizing that not everything is absolutely correct with religion. Now, there are very quick takeaways I get from your book and from your submission right now. That one, it's important to read. When I look at the way you have written your book, you talk about you reading and reading and reading. There's something I share with you. I would like to share with, point out with the viewer, to the viewers, that we talked about you doing history, English literature, and then divinity. This is what I did at HSC. This is what I did at HSC, high school certificate, before I went to university. Those are subjects I did. Now you can see how they have shaped us. How reading, because when I was in high school, of course, even in ordinary level of the high school, I was reading literature. But at high school, I majored in it so that I can be able to go ahead with it at the university or be able to know more about it. But what was important with it is that it exposed me, just like you, to books that were beyond the comprehension of so many people, the cultures of people elsewhere. You get to know the histories of people elsewhere through books which are being written. And your idea of wanting to read science, even when you read, you are not in majoring in sciences, but you simply love to read science, is amazing. And this is what I did. This is what I can encourage people in Africa to read. Read beyond the scope of what is being taught to you. Go ahead and find out what other people have written about evolution. Why do you want to be fed by the church? Why do you want to be fed by the mosque? Why should the imam be the one to tell you what is right and what's wrong? Why should the priest be the one to tell you what is final on a subject, when you can go and see what other authors have written about it? I think what can be the takeaway for Africans is that there is information out there, but what to read and how to read remains the biggest challenge. We must encourage people to read. And when we say, please look for this book, some of you have even got free copies of this book. Please read it, because you get encouraged. You get to know how people pass through different phases in life and how they get enlightened. And when they share these stories with you, you get inspired. So it's important that that takeaway of reading is also very seriously taken care of. You talk about, in your book, you talk about culture. You gave a story of when you went to where your mother is born, at your maternal side, and then there was a chief. That chapter where I talk about chiefs and all that, and then you give the example of the Igwe being the chief in the West. Then there's a name you give for you in Zimbabwe, the equivalent of the Igwe. Yes, and how people respect the Igwe, and I see exactly how it is in my own setting in Uganda. The way we respect and revere our kings, the way we respect our chiefs and our traditions and all that kind of thing. You give the example of the song they sing, and then you give the English version of it, but you say that in Shona or in your local language, it's even more like hip hop. It's more lively. People are singing, the way women are clapping hands, different from the way they're clapping hands, they're clapping in intervals, and they are praising and praising their chiefs. Then in your book, again, you talk about our culture in terms of totems. I find it very interesting, because the way you describe the totems in your own culture in Zimbabwe is the way we have them in Uganda.
Yeah.
You gave an example of your totem not allowing you to eat the heart of the cow. I should tell you that that's my totem.
Oh.
And we have over 50 totems, but my father's totem is the heart. We call it the omutima, the heart. Yes. So you said it was actually your totem, but you ate it, and I should tell you I ate my totem. This is why I found your book very interesting, because it relates to me, and I know it relates to many people. Yeah, because I share a totem with you. My totem is the heart, and I ate it. I ate it because I was always skeptical and I was rebellious. So I was always asked, why should you say we slaughter our chicken and then we throw away the heart? Yet this is a very interesting piece of meat to eat. So I disagree with whoever.
There was one time I ate it, and then my gums swelled up. Now there was no.
I saw that.
There was no way of me knowing that. Like, was this because I had eaten my totem, or was it just a coincidence? But it was probably a coincidence.
Yes, because when you continue eating, if nothing happens to you. So now I love the example of the heart you gave as a totem, and I related it to my own totem because it's the heart, the same heart, and yet we have over 50 totems in Uganda, but I belong to the totem, the heart totem. But when I look at how superstitious we are, therefore I can be able to appreciate how foreign religions were easy to sell to us.
Yes.
were easy. The assimilation you talk about, the acculturation you talk about in your book comes home, because when you look at how we appreciate certain things as part of our history, as part of our traditions, how we simply take on stuff without asking questions. For example, what happens to me when I eat the heart? If I eat the heart as a totem, what will happen to me? Will I die? Is it poisonous? But we don't ask. You'll find that someone is told, don't eat this particular fish because this is your totem, and is missing out on serious nutrients. So there are things which we people in Africa have crammed, have taken to be true, gospel truth, and haven't taken the deliberate steps to question, to say, why is it so? If I go beyond this belief, what would happen? So I appreciate your writing from that perspective, and that is the takeaway which I would like the viewers to appreciate, that the ability to ask questions is still missing in so many of our aspects in Africa. And it gives our kings, who we now call the presidents, so much powers over us. So when you look at religion and how you have explained it and the biases that it gives to us, then we look at the politics that governs us. I would like you to take us through the politics that governs our lifestyle, how the politicians behave in Africa when you look at the new king of the African king, the clansman reality, and the sons and daughters of the soul. Those three chapters, if you could summarize what we learned from them, giving examples of your own history. You have talked about the tribal politics in your book. I've been reading about you comparing South Africa with Zimbabwe, with Zambia. You talk about Uganda. You talk Paul Kagame in Rwanda. In your book, you say it's centralizing power, and it's an indicament of the kingship, the kings we had in Africa, the emperors we had in Africa. We still have them. This time we call them presidents. Please take us through the political part of the story in your book.
Oh yes. Before colonization, I think many centuries before colonization in Zimbabwe, we had a great nation called Great Zimbabwe. That was it was there from the 8th century up until the 14th century, somewhere there. They built a very great city. The ruins are still there today, and many people. It has been declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Many people come to Zimbabwe to see it. Many archaeologists, especially, and it's almost like the Egyptian pyramids, like the reverence is given. And when the white colonialists came, they said black people wouldn't have built something like this. So they said maybe it was Phoenicians who traveled in the ancient world and built it. But then archaeologists later confirmed, like, no, it was actually the Roji Shona people. And the Roji were all, their totem was all they had. So you're probably related to them too.
I think so.
Yeah. So these Roji people, they built this great city called the Great Zimbabwe. They called it Zimbabwe, which means houses of stone. Zimbabwe in modern day Shona. Of course, the Shona language is also evolved. It wasn't even called Shona back then. It was many languages. There was Karanga, there was the Zulu, there was a lot of that all merged into one language that we call Shona. And it's actually like the white colonialists who called it Shona. So it wasn't the Shona people who called themselves Shona. It's a very complicated history before that. But then one interesting thing, after this great Zimbabwe, debacle. They had a king, and this king was seen as a god, right? Even after this king died, he would become, or she would become, a very great ancestor who would sometimes allegedly speak through spirit mediums. So these kings were called Changamire. And at the fall of Great Zimbabwe, another great empire rose. It was even bigger, and it covered what we call Mozambique today and Zimbabwe, and part of what we call Zambia today. So it was a very big empire, from modern day Zambia through Zimbabwe all the way to Mozambique, the Mutapa Empire. It had like great kings called Munu Mutapa, who were like the god kings of the time. They are very famous in history. We know more about them because it was the first time the Vasco da Gama and the Portuguese, with this Catholic priest called Father Gonzalo da Silveira, came to Southern Africa via Cape Town, and they walked into the interior. All they knew were like the slave posts that the Arabs were running, like in Sofala, Mozambique, and stuff. So they had only like known Africans to be slaves going to the Arab Muslim world. They hadn't seen they had never encountered an actual African kingdom. So they decided to go into the interior, and then that's when they discovered the Mutapa Empire. And then they were very, in their records, in the Portuguese records, they were very surprised that there's such an advanced Bantu society with people who are not slaves and are actually subject to the kingdom, with a very powerful king and a very complex society. So it was quite a discovery for them. And the Portuguese set their they said their embassy, their first embassy in Southern Africa, there in the Mutapa Empire, in Nyatsimba Mutota. No, it was not Nyatsimba Mutota. It was Chikuyo Samarengo. Nyatsimba Mutota was the first Mutapa, but then Chikuyo Samarengo was the one who the Portuguese first met. And there were also Arabs in his court, and they were all looking for his approval for trade, but he wasn't quick to give. This was in the 1500s. This happened in 1537, to be exact. So it's long ago. It's more than 600 years ago.
Yeah.
And so the Portuguese were like, they were fighting with the Arabs for the attention of the Mutapa, who was Chikuyu Samari. And then finally, the Portuguese somehow managed to gain his favor, and he agreed to be baptized as a Catholic. So Father Gonzalo da Silveira baptized this king as a Catholic. And then the Arabs got jealous, and they killed Father Gonzalo da Silveira in the dark of the night. When other Portuguese settlers were in the kingdom discovered that the priest, this like esteemed priest, had been killed, they rushed back to Portugal, and then they spread the news that it was actually the Muno Mutapa who had killed him. And the Portuguese were very angry. They organized a big army wearing their like armor, like those metal armor. They didn't have guns back then. They still had swords and everything. They sailed back. Like 2 years later, they marched from Sofala in Mozambique to the Mutapa Empire. But then by the time they got there, like that metal armor was very hot for the African weather. Most of them died due to malaria. Like by the time they got there, they were just a little fraction, and they were easily killed. They sent a second one a few years later, and then they were killed again. And then they started this system because they realized that this land couldn't be conquered. So they started a system where they would bring a few people to manipulate affairs in certain kingdoms, and then these new African leaders who spring up, but then they're actually run by the Portuguese. And then the Munumtapa also had like a lot of illegitimate children, and who were understood to be bastards. These illegitimate started their own kingdoms, and then they were called the Changamires, and they considered themselves to be gods as well. And most of them were like really big military leaders that would attack the Portuguese and challenge the Portuguese authority. And then later on, I think the Portuguese like got guns, and then they became they had advantages in these civil wars, and then they became known as Portuguese prazeros, because the Portuguese realized that they had no resources to colonize this land, and if they went there, there was no malaria medication yet. So Central and Southern Africa was known as the white man's grave back then, because they would die in mass when they would come. So they would just send a few people who would become these prazeros. Prazero means, I think it means a farm in Portuguese. And they would run communities all based on this farm while dealing guns with kings and dealing in slaves and guns with the kings. And I think that was and they were also really very cruel. I remember when the British first came, there were still some prazeros. And when the British signed treaties with some of the kings, these prazeros would come and punish these kings. Like, why would you sign and then I remember this one prazero called Che Guevara, he nicknamed Che Guevara by the local people. He got arrested by. So my point is all of this in that these titles, like the Changamire, Munumutapa, and the Prazero, which in Shona people still call Muzrina Prazi. They were the people who defined. They're the people who defined power, and most people even viewed them as gods. Like, there was this Changamire, one of the bastard sons of the Mutapa, called Changamire Dombo. Changamire Dombo was like, what I know from him is a song. Like, there's no of course there are Portuguese records about him, because he defeated the Portuguese many times, and the Portuguese believed he had voodoo, like. And there are stories about him turning Keto into a different color in Portuguese
powers.
Yeah, in Portuguese historical records. So if you see like Europeans writing mythical stories about him, he might have,
because they are mythical themselves. Because they were mythical themselves. They believed in witchcraft. They believed in a lot of nonsense, a lot of superstitions. Exactly. They were superstitious.
Exactly. Yes. So like, yeah, even the Portuguese viewed him in that mythical light. And there is a song, a traditional Shona song. It's sang by this African traditionalist called Chiwoniso. She died some years back, but she was one of those musicians who still like sang about Shona spirituality and stuff. They sang a song about him, and it's actually a popular song if you go to African traditional ceremonies. And it's about his life story, and that's where most of the stuff we know about him. Like, his name was actually Pasipamire, which means the ground still stands. I'm not sure what that meant is. And he was just a simple man from the village, according to the song. And And then Chaminuka came. Chaminuka was an ancient king who had died, but was now understood to be a god, right? Maybe a few generations back, there were 2 stories being told about him. And then they say, then Chaminuka came, and Pasipa Mire was changed, and the spirit was born. And all of a sudden, he's no longer Pasipa Mire, he is now Chaminuka. And then the song goes on to say Chaminuka and the Mambo, which means Chaminuka is king. So automatically, this guy, whether it doesn't matter that like a normal guy from the village, the fact that Chaminuka spirit sits on him, he's now a king. So there's that strong religious aspect to the idea of leadership in Zimbabwean culture. And there was some time in August 2020, I had come back to Zimbabwe from South Africa, and I was just very curious. Like I'd never actually researched about African traditional religion before, and then I was told a lot about it by these workers because I was doing a marketing business, like marketing businesses, like handling social media and stuff, and I've seen that a lot of my clients I could get were in a area where like in Harare's industrial area, where people were there were mechanics, there were panel beaters, all of that kind of. Those are the people I was spending time with every day. And if I was not doing content strategies with them, I was just talking, just general, like so a lot of them from rural areas. And then they told me about and then I asked them about, hey, how about African traditional religion? And then they were like, oh yeah, there are a lot of them there in the village. You want to go see in my village like this August? That's the season where like we awaken the ancestors. I was like, oh, okay. I would love to see that. So I went to Chiweshe in August 2020. And I attended one of these festivals. They make traditional beer like for 7 days. It's even like it's an interesting process. Like they'll be cooking this beer for 7 days, like undergoing different stages to making the beer, and then when it's finally done, people from all over the village come and meet that night. And then they are playing the traditional instruments, like there's what we call the mbira. It's a traditional African instruments from mostly the Shona culture. They are marimbas. Most of these instruments don't have like an English name because they are only found in the Shona culture. And then there are also drums. And then they'll be singing these songs about ancestors from the people whose tribes are there. And then there was this girl who was there, and then she apparently had an ancestor sit on her, right? And she started talking in a male-like voice. Even I was like, what's going on there? And then they had killed a cow as a sacrifice, right? And this girl went on to eat, to drink the blood from the cow, bro, while it was coming, and eating the intestines with and all their like
when they are raw.
Exactly. Like it was like she was in a trance. Even her eyes were white. What had happened to them, and then she started speaking like she was this ancestor, and all of a sudden people were like, no, she's no longer her name, like what I don't remember what
she's now possessed. She's now a new person, a new spirit, you know.
And she was now this man. She even started dressing as a man, and she was even like housed, like protected in a hut, like she's not supposed to meet people the day after,
Oh,
stuff like
wow.
that. So yeah, it gave me an insight, like seeing this, it gave me some insight to say, okay, so this is where we're coming from. All those Changamires I read about in history books, this is the Chaminukas, this
Yes.
is what they went through. So you also find that there is a strong religious aspect to this leadership. And some of them, it doesn't even have to matter like if they know what they're doing or not. If you look at the current Zimbabwean president, he it was clear that like the election had some controversies with it, and the soldiers, when people protested only a day after the elections, like soldiers were shooting people in the street. And then he goes on to the campaign trail, or to the people, and then he says the voice of the people, or the voice of the people is the voice of God, which means like he's alluding to that biblical ideal that uh, leaders are chosen by God. And the opposition leader is not different. The opposition leader is actually became a pastor towards the election.
Can
And
you
when you
imagine
ask him
that?
what his plan is, he talks about God is going to talk. God is going to decide. Like, so there's this whole like um idea of a divine calling or a divine purpose of a leader that they champion to give themselves legitimacy. And it also comes from this idea of a religious, spiritual leader from history. So yeah, um, I think our historical understanding of who a leader is, who lacks accountability, who appeals to things we cannot measure or prove, um, who just goes like or harnesses the beliefs of people or the delusions of people and uses them to their advantage, is what we have in an African leader today. I've also noticed like there are times when other African leaders, like the former president of Zambia, Edgar Lungu, he had a national day of prayer. Like there was an Amiwen plug that like affected food security in the country, and he was being asked about what the plan is, and then he was like, "Oh, we are going to have a national day of prayer." And I was thinking like, okay, prayer makes you feel good about doing nothing. I mean, what's the plan really? And he even went as far as to appoint a ministry of religious affairs.
Wow.
uh,
That's quite
and the
interesting.
ministry,
A ministry of religious affairs.
yes. So
Wow.
whatever the dominant religious idea of the time is, the current leader who's there, they go for it because that's their legitimacy. Even President Mugabe kind of mixed it. He was Catholic, like that was his
Yeah.
actual religion, because he was mission schooled at the same school I went to, and yeah, he was a Catholic. He was a Catholic. He was even like housed during the liberation struggle. He was even housed by priests and nuns. So he's very passionate about Catholicism. But when he was visiting rural people, he would appease the African traditional religion. He would even wear those animal skins. And he would also go to this very problematic new religion that started during colonial times called African Apostolic Faith. I talked about them in my book a lot. The African Apostolic faiths. These people, they started because like a lot of the Christianity that was going on during the early days of colonization, it wasn't compatible with African culture. It was very Eurocentric. So there were some very interesting people. There was John Masowe and there was Paul Mwaja. These people were raised in missionary societies. Like I remember Paul Mwaja was raised by Methodist missionaries. So they started to start their own cult following of African traditional religion, but then mixed with very, very, very conservative Christian or Puritan Christian ideals. So they live as if they lived in the Old Testament. They are polygamous. They marry 11-year-old brides. They don't allow their members to go to the hospital. And a lot of them, I think even their current leader has something like 25 wives. And most of them are under the age of 14. And they have such a majority in the rural areas, such that people like the government tries to appease them because they know if they support them, they convince the people to vote for, or they order the people to vote for.
Now, I would like to have you pause it there just briefly. I mean, this is where the problem is for Africa, dear viewers. To further this conversation, look at our societies and look at what's happening today in the 21st century, where we have people amidst us who find it very fine for a man my age to have a wife of 11 years.
And 10 years. You know what's messed up? What's messed up is that there was a point when the ruling party actually tried to reduce the age of consent to 12 years so that they appease that sect. And even like if you look at areas where there are a lot of them, there are even measles outbreaks. Measles is supposed to be extinct, but because they don't vaccinate their children, the young brides might also catch HIV and AIDS, but they're not allowed to go to the hospital, and so they die. And then I saw a video, because it's election season in Zimbabwe right now. I saw a very recent video, like it must have been a month ago. And then there was one of those conferences. They wear white garments and stuff. And then whenever you see them in Zimbabwe, you see like a huge space of area with people in white. Even if you go to Cape Town, because there are a lot of Zimbabweans in South Africa, you see them on the side of the road. They've become one of the tourist attractions of Cape Town, because people be curious. Oh, those people in white, like they look like those dreamy Africans in white and everything.
I just want to support your argument by bringing it home. But even before I do that, just this week, I've been reading several posts from my Nigerian friends in northern Nigeria, where a man who is about 60 years is seen marrying a girl who is 11 years old. And this man is doing it in the name of Islam. You are 60 years old, and because of Islam, you are allowed to marry a girl who is 11. It's not my story. You can check it out. Anyone can see it on Facebook. Simply check Nigeria. You are going to see these bizarre stories. Now, leaving that aside, the example you are giving of people in white tunics, we have so many of them in Uganda. We have a sect which has thousands and thousands of followers. It's called the Bishaka obusobozi religion. They mask themselves.
So they're actually similar versions of them.
Exactly, the same. They wear white tunics. Their days they don't go to they go to their church. They have their own church called Itambiro, their own version of churches. They reject Jesus Christ. They reject foreign religions. Yes. And then they form their own Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Their leader, their founder, who is now dead about 2 years ago, was the one they took as God. But I should tell you that these are thousands and thousands. If you go to Google and put in there Obusobozi Bishaka, a religion in Uganda, Western Uganda, you'll see the president respects them and even gives them vehicles and lots of money. People in that area, the politicians, must subscribe to the religion in this 21st century. At least they must pay allegiance, they must pay respect. Now, how are we going to develop Africa when we still believe in outdated religions? How are we going to develop Africa?
I was watching.
Yes.
I was watching a video of them doing their conference just last week, and
yes.
And their leader was actually telling them, you should all vote for President Mnangagwa, like the current president is the one who supported them. He even allowed them to go meet during the COVID pandemic without masks and everything. And even though their death toll rose, including one of their leaders dying back then, no one took hint of it. So they were actually meeting up last week, and then they were being told, you should go vote for President Mnangagwa, and if you vote for Mnangagwa, 15 years will be added to your life. And they all rose up, yes. And then I was like, huh.
We have a comment from, that's beautiful. We have a comment from our American viewer, Amber Dawn Boyang Anderson. She says that all these missionaries need to help themselves. They might then implode as they have done to so many other countries and cultures. There you are.
Yes.
There you are. Let's continue. Carry on as we go towards the conclusion of this episode.
Awesome.
Yeah. So we are looking at religion, we are looking at our culture, and we are looking at our politics and politicians. And right in the book before us, which we are reviewing today, Vehicle for Progress, which you can get on Amazon. In the book, the author, who is our guest today, talks about different political parties and how these political parties are patronages, are compromised, how these political parties basically are full of divisions, are very divisive, alongside tribal sentiments, alongside religious sentiments. This is what I read in your book. But sadly true, this is what is seen throughout Africa, where we form political parties along tribal sentiments, where we go to belong to political parties because it's my tribesman in charge, where we go to vote because I want to vote for my tribesman. And mark you, I'm not even saying tribeswoman. We are more patriarchal. Tribesman. Tribesman. It must be us in power.
Because they have the idea that women are going to be married to other tribes. So they see them as disposable.
Exactly. The idea that my tribe should be in power, the idea that a person of my religion must be in power, the idea that a chief, a president is an equivalent of the god, is the same version of the empire we had, of the chiefs and the kings we had, because the king was both political and divine. Today in Africa, we have presidents. We think, you people think in Africa that these presidents come from God. And these are dictators. These are bloody dictators. In your book, in your chapter 4, chapter 5, and chapter 6, you talk about this stuff. African dictators taking over the colonial legacy of the authoritarian administration. In chapter 6, we talk about tribalism and how it affects our politics and how it undermines nationalism, where we no longer care about a country, we care about a region, we care about a tribe, not the country, and this affects us. You talk about in chapter 7, you talk about which you call sons and daughters of the soil. You talk about political parties and how they promote patronage, as I've said, and totalitarianism, which is masked as nationalism. You give examples of ZANU-PF in Zimbabwe, other parties in South Africa. So briefly, what you write in this book, which I do encourage the viewers to look for, the book Vehicle for Progress on Amazon, you show us how divided we are because of our tribes, because of our regions, and you properly highlight how it is dangerous for the progress of Africa. I understand you say in your book that you studied development, social development studies at the university. You give an example of you working with an organization as a project administrator, assistant, and how you observed your community, trying to make sure that they go beyond these sentiments of tribes and religion and how they are tying us down. So in conclusion, for today's show, would like you to give us the takeaway in the last chapters we have looked at, from chapter 4 to chapter 7. What do we learn? And as people in Africa, as people in the world, what can we learn from those chapters that can be used as realistic to take Africa forward? Politically, from the political angle, from the religious angle, and what are the takeaway lessons we pick from this book going forward?
I think the biggest problem we have with tribalism is that when you look at countries that work well, is that they have a national identity, a lot of them. You can go to America, you come to America and you'll see that most people in America view themselves as Americans. They all have the idea that we all chose to be Americans. Our ancestors chose to be Americans.
I want to pause you a bit there. I want to, just a minute before you go in deep, because you have scratched my mind a little more. When I was in the US, the several times I've gone to the US, I've realized that basically America had so many poor people. When I was in Washington, I was surprised. As an African coming from Uganda, I was surprised to see beggars in Washington, poor people without shoes. In Washington, I was surprised to see people sleeping in shacks, in structures which I don't even see in my own country. People sleeping on the roadside in America, in Washington. And even when I moved to Miami, even when I moved to other states, I continue to see poor people. But how are the Americans packaging themselves? They are going to show you the best version of them, because every American is proud to be an American. They rarely showcase their bad side. They rarely showcase their poverty. They want to create an image of power, the American dream, which we all think is actually a reality, when in actual sense, not everyone is living the American dream. But nationalism, if I should put it the way you have put it, and the way you put it in your book, is far high among the Americans. They believe in America. They believe in a united America. How about Africans? We are all cursing our continent. We are all cursing ourselves. We are all cursing our countries. We think we have the worst countries. We are believing in our tribes. We better have a tribal ruler as a president than a unifier. So I find your book very important, especially because when you said America, it triggered me because I saw many poor people in America. But Americans will give you the best version of them because they are nationalistic. Please go ahead as we conclude.
When they report on Africa, they always take the west part of Africa. They don't show the good parts.
Exactly.
like
Exactly.
you find that they're nationalistic because they America came like as a conscious decisions by its citizens, right?
Mm.
So that's why they have even more civic awareness. I admire the civic drive of Americans, their civic awareness. They know their rights.
Yeah. Yeah.
People can say what they want about like even white racist women being Karens, but one thing you know about a Karen is that she has civic awareness. She knows that she can stand up for yeah, it's white privilege, but
Yes.
they know that they have that entitlement. Their system has been so good to them. They have that
Mm.
entitlement to say, I can call the manager and get my way.
Mm. Mm.
Yes. And you also find that in Europe, most European countries came as alliances between many states, like for instance in Germany, and they all agreed to amalgamate like that and everything. It's not the case with Africa. With Africa, there were different tribes with villages and all of that, and they were very satellite villages. They were doing their own thing. Some of them were nomads, some of them were pastoralists, some of them were farmers, and some of them were traders or fishermen or artisans. They all had their way of life. So when colonization happened, these borders made at the Berlin Conference in 1884, they became like a defining, a defining factor to say these are now the African borders. This is South Africa. This is Rhodesia. This is Southern Rhodesia. This is Northern Rhodesia. This is Mozambique.
Mm.
This is Botswana. This is Namibia.
Mm.
This is Angola, DRC, wada, right? So within these borders, there were many tribes. In Zimbabwe alone, there were over 14 tribes. In South Africa, there were even more. I mean, South Africa stretches. And these countries were meant for white people. They were not meant for Africans.
Mm.
I
Mm.
mean, it's white people who draw them for themselves. There was no African in
Yeah.
attendance at the Berlin
No way.
Conference. There was no
Mm.
African in attendance. No African in the room. And they just secured treaties from kings who couldn't read and had to rely on missionaries.
Interpreters who are biased already.
Yes, because they've been
Mm.
raised by
Mm.
missionaries and everything.
Yeah.
So in Zimbabwe, in particular, there was two of the biggest tribes that were fighting at the time were the Karanga people, who are now what you would call the Shona, a great part of what you call the Shona,
Mm.
and the Ndebele, who were like a faction of the Zulu who had fled from Shaka. There was a civil war in
Mm.
Shaka's kingdom, and a lot of the tribes fled Shaka's violence, and they went and conquered other tribes. The Kumalo
Mm.
tribe was one of those Indunas from Muzilika's from Shaka's army. Muzilikas was one of Shaka's
Mm.
Indunas, Shaka's generals,
Mm.
and then he came to
Mm.
Zimbabwe and he conquered the Karanga in what we call Bulawayo today, and he started a kingdom. And
Yeah.
his kingdom was mainly based on military raids. He would just go and raid Shona villages, Karanga villages, and then he would take the women and he would burn the villages and he would take their cattle. And then they would raid a new village. That was just the way they. So there was a lot of like tribal animosity going on there. And the Shonas weren't at the time. At that point, they had undergone through the whole period of Mutapa rule. They had undergone the period of Prazero rule and Changamire rule, and they were now just beaten to death. Like their former
Yeah.
great players of Great
Mm.
Zimbabwe and the Mutapa Empire were now just like a thing of the past, things that people just heard through stories, but they were like a shadow of their former selves at the time. So when the Ndebeles came from South Africa and started raiding them, they were an easy target, and yeah, that animosity grew further. And then when the white people came, they were afraid of the Ndebele because the Ndebele had that military might. So they went, they got the concession signed by the Ndebele, but then they went and settled amongst the Shona with the help of this guy called Selous, who had relationships with Shona people through his explorations in the in inland Zimbabwe. So when they went and settled there, and then they later had to colonize the Ndebele kingdom as well, because the Ndebeles kept coming to raid the Shona, even though they were now subjects of white colonial rule. So when that happened and Bulawayo came down, the Ndebele came under the colony as well, but they were no longer in charge. Because the Shonas were more obedient to the colonialists, they got into positions of power, and they were also the majority. So even when and Shona was, by the way, was like a derogatory name that the Ndebele were giving all these tribes that later on stuck. So it was like many tribes that were called Shona, and then after a while the name stuck. So it was only like on independence, like around independence, when of course Ndebele had their political party led by this guy called Joshua Nkomo, and then while the Shona had their many political leaders. There was Josiah Kronogala, there was Herbert Chitepo, some of whom were in exile, and then there were a lot of politics. And there was Ndamaningi Stole, who was actually from my tribe, the Ndau. It was actually a minority tribe, but the rest of the Izano didn't want him because he was from this minority tribe. But he had just been there because of his activism. But Mugabe, who was the Zulu, and which is a great fraction of the Shona, and Mnangagwa, who's Karanga, which is also a great part of the Shona. They didn't want all this minority. There was also like Herbert Chitepo, who was Manyika, also a minority tribe in the Shona. And there were all these plots. Herbert Chitepo was actually killed in a car by fellow. So you find that they didn't want someone who was from these minority tribes to lead. And then when independence finally came, a lot of Game of Thrones had happened between Nkomo from the Ndebele side and all of these leaders in Mugabe. And somehow, because of circumstances and support from the UK, Mugabe came out the victor. And he became the first black prime minister of the country.
Yeah.
And the first thing he did when he got into power was do an operation called Gukula Honde. Gukula Honde is the name given to the first rains of after that wash away the debt.
Clean up.
Clean up the rains that clean up the debt. So he had his military unit that had gone to train in North Korea, called the 5th Brigade, led by the current president, Mnangagwa. And their first order of business once they stepped into Zimbabwe were go to the Matabeleland province where the Ndebele are and kill them. So they went there and they killed over 80,000 Ndebele people on the allegation that they still had guns from the war, which was not even proven. It was just a straight up genocide.
Yeah, it was.
And yes, so you find that these borders were not meant for black people, and they are all already rival tribes that when it's like someone went and colonized Europe during the time of King Henry V, and then they they made the UK and France one country. It wasn't going to work out. It wouldn't work out because they were beefing. Yes. So it's kind of the same scenario. Like that these tribes are. You can say the same about Rwanda and the Tutsi and the Hutu. There are a lot of such similar cases of different tribes, rival tribes being clustered into one country, and then they break out into civil war because they don't have this colonial national identity. Of course, you would say like, yo, this is the country of Zimbabwe, but these are not like the Karanga, the Ndau, or the Manyika, or the Ndebele who drew these borders. It was Otto von Bismarck in 1884. So, yeah, like you also find that the political parties who are in power come with that totalitarianism to say, we are ZANU-PF, and this is our tribe. This is we are Karanga, we are Zezuru, and even when they do their whole system of patronage, their corruption, they are only doing corruption to favor people from their tribes. They promote each other. Other tribes are being neglected. The same was true in Zambia. Lungu, the former president, he was very tribalist, and people from his tribe were getting promotions. They were getting tenders. They were getting in South Africa. The ruling ANC favors the Zulu people.
Yeah.
And I think it's something that started during Zuma's time. Like ANC used to be like a really good party, like for everyone. If you call it the Rainbow Party, everyone loved it. When there was Mandela, when there was Thabo Mbeki. But when Zuma came along, Zuma was a problematic one. I mean, he's the one who took SARS, the institution that like made South Africa so successful, the South African Revenue Service, like it was the backbone of their social democracy. And if even countries like Sweden and Norway had to learn from that model to come up with the like advanced models they had today. They actually learned from SARS, from the South African model. And Zuma took that down because he didn't want to be investigated for corruption. And after that, like after doing all of this, he makes ANC a very tribal party, like supporting the Zulu because he was Zulu himself. He even supports the Zulu xenophobic sentiments that were going on at the time, and giving the Zulu king at the time, King Zwelithini, giving him an audience when he talks about, we should take out foreigners and take them back to their country. And the foreigners they're speaking about are like fellow African foreigners. And you find that even like today, Ramaphosa, even like Carter's forward, because he has seen that Zulus vote for ANC. So he wants to maintain that he's not Zulu himself, Ramaphosa, but he supports the Zulus because his party is supported by the Zulus. And
the majority.
He goes on to support the xenophobic sentiments of the Zulus. He even attends the coronation of the new Zulu king, even though it's mired in controversy. And you find that even like other parties like the Economic Freedom Fighters, although they claim to be Pan-African, you find that it's mostly Xhosa. Like it's Xhosa people who support Julius Malema and his crew. And they're also tribalistic in that way, even though they would come with sentiments of Pan-Africanism. Of course, I would give them the fact that they are not xenophobic. Yeah, that's progressive. But yeah, they do come up with some tribal ideology as well. Even their like very radical approach to racial equality. That is like there's a current thing like they are doing right now. I haven't like researched much about it. I've just read a little about it online. But on Monday, there's something happening in South Africa pertaining to white businesses and everything. You find that at the center of it is that us versus them mentality, which has a lot to do with the whole tribal entitlement. And yeah, so it has made Africa a boiling pot to say, like, there are these tribes that have just been trapped within these borders and forced into a country.
Very important to note there. Yeah, very, very important insight there you give. Of course, just to add more on what I've said, it's a problem that cuts across Africa, especially sub-Saharan Africa, I should say. It's a big problem. Tribalism, tribal politics is quite big in East Africa, just as you see it in West Africa, you see it in your own region of South Africa. It is our biggest challenge in East Africa. You look at Uganda and the political party in power, and then you see tribalism. You see the president favoring people of his own tribe, giving ministerial positions, and even they go beyond tribalism. They even become, they go into nepotism.
Yes.
They go into sectarianism, you know. We at that level where a president doesn't get ashamed to have his son, to have his wife, to have his brother in a cabinet. And in so many other African countries, we see these kind of examples coming out. Now, when you look at Kenya, for example, you look at their politics, it's too tribal. It's beyond tribal, it's even violent much of the time. In fact, this time around, people were surprised that there was no scuffle in Kenya after the election. There was no tribal clashes after the election because it has been the norm for a long time. As you said rightly so, Rwanda was divided on tribal grounds. And in Rwanda, you find that there are less than 3 tribes. But still, you find no peace. And credit can be given to Kagame today because at least they have tried to create a kind of a semblance of peace between the tribes. Of course, thanks for his brutal ways of handling his people, silencing criticism and all that. There is a bit of peace anyway. But the tribal card in African politics, the politics of glorifying our presidents, our politicians, deifying them, godifying them, praising them even where they go wrong, that politics should end. I would like to hear from you as we conclude your way forward, your suggestions as a way forward in the book when it comes to politics in Africa. In 5 minutes as we conclude.
Okay. I think the most important thing is civic awareness, raising civic awareness amongst African citizens. Because there's been that leap from the pre-colonial kingdom to the post-colonial democracy. Most Africans live in rural areas. I gave an example last week of how 70% of Zimbabweans live in rural areas with chiefs that have like the natural birthright to rule. So imagine telling someone who is ruled by a monarch to say, oh yeah, there's also a president and a member of parliament and a councillor who you can vote for. Those are just afterthoughts to them because in their world, it's a chief who rules. So civic awareness is very important. I think it's what we need to raise. I think if civic awareness is increased, people get to know about the principles of constitutionalism, because I've heard most Africans talk about the constitution, but they don't understand what it is there for. They just see it as a document of authority to say this is the majority. They have like a very layman understanding of it. They don't even understand like what the principles of constitutionalism entail. So I think making sure that people understand the principles of constitutionalism and why we have a constitution in the first place, why we have a republic in the first place, what their role as citizens is, what their rights as citizens is. That is very important. So people need to be aware of their role, their rights, and the essence of this system, what it is about, their responsibility. It also even goes to like when governments are introducing policies, like a lot of people are indifferent. Many people, all they know about their civic duty is elections. They'll be like, oh yes, we voted for Mugabe, he's our president, but that's that.
Yeah.
They don't know about his policies. Because like when African politicians are campaigning, they don't campaign with their policies. They just campaign with hiring musicians and stuff because they know civic awareness is very low. People are just going to go with the most popular, and they give or vote buying. Some of them they give free fertilizers or free seeds, and people will be like, yes, we're voting for this one. They donated all this food to us. So yeah, they also need to know their role. Like this is not just the president's job to run a country or the member of parliament's job. They are also like should be active citizens in the country that are going to exercise their civic duties and civic rights. When policies come forward, they should participate for these policies to be successful. I mean, you can say what you want about ZANU-PF and this totalitarianism, but they've had some pretty solid policies in the past. Like I remember the ZIMAS program, which is one of the best policies for an African countries I've ever seen. But implementing it, no one cooperated. It was just like the opposition that was criticizing it, and it was sabotaged in the end. But looking at it on paper, it was actually something that was the answer for all of Zimbabwe's problems. And there are a lot of policies that I've come across that are very solid, but then because the people are not like don't cooperate, there are also like policies like that prevent a crisis from happening. Like in Zimbabwe, we had a problem with currency. We've been using US dollars for a while in Zimbabwe. So we've had other monetary policies that have come along because people just couldn't follow simple policies. Like, for instance, when you're using the US dollars, Zimbabweans found that these dollars, like, they buy more in Mozambique or in South Africa or in Botswana.
Okay.
So they would go to South Africa and then they would buy whatever they want to buy. They convert them to rands, they convert them to pula in Botswana, they convert them to metcash in Mozambique. And then they would buy whatever they want to buy there. And then they'll come with it in bulk. They'll be like, yes, we're rich. So, but then there's no money like left in the system. And then we had the liquidity crisis. And then the finance minister at the time, who was Patrick Chinamasa, said, okay, I talked to President Obama. Obama was still the president back then. And he gave us like more cash, and he told us to put more restrictions so that money doesn't move out of the country. It's all spent here in Zimbabwe. Zimbabweans didn't listen. Like, even though like they put higher tariffs on important goods and everything, but still Zimbabweans found their way around it. They still kept going to buy in South Africa. Like, if you're going to go to the road that goes from Zimbabwe to South Africa, you're going to find many buses every day. You're going to find queues at the border. And these people are just going to go there to buy stuff and then come back home. Even I remember, like, there was a time when my mother would go to South Africa, to Johannesburg, on a Friday, or Friday afternoon up to Saturday morning. She'd be on the bus to Johannesburg, and then she'll spend the Saturday in Johannesburg shopping. And then when it's nighttime, she would go back on the bus, and then they'll be there back to Zimbabwe by Sunday afternoon. And then she'll be sleeping, and then there's a room full of groceries and gadgets and stuff she bought in South Africa. And it was the same thing going on in every household. That's how I remember my childhood. So you find that like these policies were meant to stop another liquidity crisis from happening. Another liquidity crisis happens. Now there are people queuing at banks and stuff because there's no money in circulation. Although the bank says you have money, like most of the money, the $250 million that came from America to sort of the river, it's all in South Africa, it's all in Mozambique, it's all in Botswana. And they did this 3 times until the Mugabe government said, okay, we are now giving you this token money, like called bond notes. Your dollars, they'll be kept in like the African Development Bank, and we'll just give you these bond notes as token money. They can only be used here in Zimbabwe, so that it's 1:1 as the dollar, because it's just based on the US dollar in the bank. It was a new policy to take so that no other liquidity crisis happens. But then still, you get these money changes coming to the street, and then they give you a rate like, okay, I'll give you like $10. You give me 100 bond notes. And that trade started going on. People start selling money. Zimbabwe is the one place, because like even if you go to Zimbabwe today, you have US dollars. You can buy with your US dollars in the shop, but then you find that it's cheaper to buy with bond notes. So you go and sell someone your US dollars for a higher rate. $1 I had is now 1,200 bond note.
Wow.
Because of that Russian law keep going on, and the inflation keeps rising. So that money that was supposed to be 1:1, because people are still trading it on the street. It goes back to civic awareness. People are not aware of the government policy or what it is. They are just concerned about what they want, whatever they want to do. So
awareness.
Civic awareness will go a long way in.
Yes, that's one of the things I note in your book. Viewers, we are looking at A Vehicle for Progress, a book written by our comrade guest Takudizwa. We have him here today, and the book is Vehicle for Progress. The author is Takudizwa Mazwenduna, and you can get this book on Amazon. Simply put in the author's name and put in the title of the book. You'll get this book, 12 chapters of beautifully written book about Africa. You have heard us talking about the challenges we face in Africa, but also he gives a way forward on how to move forward. We are coming to the conclusion of this episode. We shall have him next Saturday to handle briefly the last 4 chapters, where we are going to concentrate more on sex dogma, the consumer culture, the cultural reform, and urban supremacy as chapters he handles. We shall look at that sex dogma in our next episode. We look at how we are tying ourselves on things that we should be letting go. So, in a word, I want to thank you so much for being part of us today, Takudizwa, and I would like to say, give 1 or 2 words to the viewers, and then we promise them to be here next Saturday.
Thank you very much. It's been an honor being here, giving insights into my thought processes and the background to the reasons why I wrote this book. The main idea of the book is that culture is supposed to be a vehicle for progress. Culture is supposed to be something that moves society forward. It's not supposed to cause harm. It's supposed to be moral in that it's supposed to champion people's well-being. Culture is something that should reform and progressive and not dogmatic. So the book generally looks at those issues from an African perspective and recollecting African experiences, looking at issues like education, religion, politics, even the social culture. So yes, I'm really glad to be here and sharing insights into the book and what it is all about. I'll be here next week to talk about the last few chapters, which are very interesting.
Very good. Thank you very much, comrade brother Takudizwa. Thank you for making time to be part of the show and, of course, taking us through this very important book. I'd like to encourage our viewers to please look up this book on Amazon, A Vehicle for Progress. And we shall be here next Saturday to tackle the last 4 chapters of the book. Live well, stay well, have hope, live better, and don't lose hope. We are saying goodbye and we are signing out. See you next Saturday. Keep watching the show and keep recommending it to all your friends. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.